All right, so when I started, I said this is going to take some time to do chapter 17. The one thing that you find in, hi David, the one thing that you find that's common in almost all commentaries is they will say chapter 17 and 18 to some degree are the most difficult chapters in the entire book to deal with, and you'll get multiple views on it. They should be taken, chapter 17 and 18 should be taken as a single unit, and you'll find a number of commentators. We're going to look at one. We're going to look at a couple different views as we do this today. We're going to look at one that both of them are futurist views, but one of them places the occurrences of chapter 17 not in chronological order, Tim, not in chronological order, but goes back and says this really fits more appropriately into the first 3.5 years of tribulation. That's one view. The second view is that it fits exactly where it should. So we'll look at both of those, and I'll give you kind of an idea of what that means. From Ron Rhodes is who we've talked about before, the 40 days through Revelation, views chapter 17 and 18 this way. First, chapter 17. John wrote the book of Revelation in the order in which the truth was revealed to him. However, the events described are not necessarily all in chronological order. This is the case with Revelation 17, which depicts a scene from the first half of tribulation. And Ron Rhodes and a number of others will dedicate chapter 17 to what they call the fall of religious Babylon, and chapter 18 to the fall of commercial Babylon. So Rhodes goes on to say this: why does Babylon represent false religion? In ancient times, the Babylonians believed in many false gods and goddesses and were deeply entrenched in paganism, idolatry, and divination. With such a history, it is not surprising that the false religious system of the tribulation period is identified with Babylon. So that's going to be one view that we'll look at. The other view out of expositors is similar in many respects, but does not go back and place it at the mid part of tribulation. So now, let me just hit the questions we're going to address today, and then kind of an introduction here. First of all, who is the woman? Secondly, who or what are the waters of verse 15? 3, who is the beast? 4, what do the 7 heads represent? 5, who or what do the 10 horns represent? And the 6th one is the difficulty in verses 16 and 17. So those are the things we're going to look at. Now, and the expositor says this as well. In an important sense, the way you interpret chapter 17 controls the interpretation of the whole book of Revelation. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, you're going to see as we get a little further into this that we're going to get a couple of good possibilities in terms of views. This, when we've... wrong slide. Sorry, folks. Well, if I can get it here... That's the one I wanted. You recall when we did our very first session, we said there are 4 ways you can interpret Revelation. 4 common ways that you can interpret Revelation. One of which was preterism, which meant everything that you read throughout the entire book has been fulfilled, was fulfilled by about 400 AD. The second is historism, which means from the time of the cross onwards, things are being fulfilled as we go along. The third was idealism. There's no historical fulfillment. It's just a picture of what things are going to be like. Tim, you were talking about this the other day, that you'd read something similar to it. And then the fourth one was yet to be fulfilled. We've been pursuing the futurism yet to be fulfilled as the tasks that were taken for this class. But when we get into this, you're going to see that, and a lot of the preterist case is going to be made in how you interpret this specific chapter. Now, let me give you a overview of how expositors looks at this. Many exegesis is the process of drawing out meaning from the Bible, as opposed to eisegesis, which means reading in. You want to be an exegete. You want to pull out what the meaning is. You don't want to be an eisegete, someone who puts your own meaning into it. So many exegetes see Babylon representing the city of Rome. Pretty common and has been for some time. The beast stands for the Roman Empire as a whole. The 7 hills are the 7 selected dynasties of the Roman emperors from Augustus to Domitian, who's ruling at the time of John's isolation. The 10 kings are the heads of lesser restless states. And John's prediction of the fall of Babylon is the announcement of the impending dissolution of the Roman Empire. And that's one of the interpretations, and fits most closely with what I call a preterist, or at least a historist view, of how you would read this. Now, the expositors goes on, however, and says, however, and it gives you a different way of looking at it. And I'm going to read out of that in just a minute. I do want to point out that once we get through chapter 22, we're going to, if anyone who wants to, we're going to take another week, and David is going to lead us through what I would call, I guess I'd call it more of a preterist or historist view. Is that an accurate?
Historist.
A historist view? Which will expose some of the things that we're talking about here. I should probably also point out that when I say the B stands for the Roman Empire as a whole, that there will be a lot of connections made to the papacy and to the followings of the Catholic Church. That's fairly common. Now, that view didn't come around. It's a relatively new view. I want to say the 1400s. Probably has its history earlier than that, but came to prominence in, say, the 1400s, as did the historist view, probably about the 1200s. The futurist view goes back to, although there were people in the futurist view who already were saying, we're not sure this is accurate, but it goes back to probably the earliest times of the churches. So those are the views, and that's why chapter 17, as we get into this, you'll see why, chapter 17 is often the pivotal chapter on how you approach any one of these views. So, now let me tell you what the expositor, let me give you the exception that the expositors talks about, and the one we will follow mostly today, and that's this. And by the way, what I just read you about most exegetes comes directly out of the expositor's Bible commentary. Many scholars of unquestioned competence have been fully convinced of the certainty of these questions, the ones I just read to you. In other words, the B stands for the Roman Empire, 7 hills, etc. However, there is evidence that casts doubt on this exegesis and impels us to look for a more adequate, if also a more subtle, understanding of John's intention. It is simply not sufficient to identify Rome and Babylon. For that matter, Babylon cannot be confined to any one historical manifestation, past or future. Babylon has multiple equivalents. The details of John's descriptions do not neatly fit any past city, whether literal Babylon, Sodom, Egypt, Rome, or even Jerusalem. Babylon is found wherever there is a satanic deception. It may be said that Babylon represents the total culture of the world apart from God, while the divine system is depicted by the New Jerusalem. Rome is simply one manifestation of the total system. So that'll give you an idea of how we're going to approach this for at least this study. It's interesting to note that Babylon, I want to say Babylon is mentioned 287 times. It's close to 300 times in the Bible. And it can be, and often is, the literal city, the city of Nebuchadnezzar, but it also is used as a representation of all that is evil. When the prophets are talking about Babylon, or later when we get into later books of depicting Babylon, it's because it's depicted as the most evil. If you think about that from a Jewish standpoint, why wouldn't it be? The two nations that would have had most of the impact on the Jewish people would have been Assyria to conquer the northern kingdom, and then Babylon to conquer the southern kingdom. Furthermore, Babylon will destroy the temple. So you can understand why, from a Judaism standpoint, Babylon would be viewed as the most egregious, sinful nation there could be, or sinful world there could be. So I'm going to break this into two sections. We're going to do verses 1 through 6 first. And the reason I'm going to do that is what you're going to see is, starting in verse 7, is an explanation of what went in the first 6 verses. One of the good things about apocalyptic literature is it often will give you the vision, and then it will come back and say, here's what the vision means. In this particular case, that's not going to be a lot of help, because even when the angel expresses what that vision means, it's very difficult to follow. So let's do the first 6 verses, and we'll answer some of our questions, and then we'll come back and read the last, the verse 7 through the end. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with wine of her adulteries. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a desert. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names, and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with the abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. This title was written on her head: Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes, and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished." So in the first couple of verses, we're going to deal with who's the woman and who or what are the waters. So first of all, who's the woman? Well, as I said earlier, and we'd have had to have cheated and gone all the way down to verse 18 to get a better description of her. But the woman is the great city. If you look at verse 18 at the end of the chapter, the woman you saw is a great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Now, the expositors, again, is going to give us a depiction of who that great city is. And you might recall we've dealt with this on a couple of occasions. One was the great city being Jerusalem, one the great city being Babylon. Sometimes the city is a city in Egypt. So here's what the expositor's commentary says about Babylon. "But the great prostitute, Babylon, that Revelation describes as not a mere historical city with its inhabitants, whether in John's past, present, or future. Rather, the city is the mother of all these historical prostitutes, the archetypal source of every idolatrous manifestation in time and space. Therefore, it is as much a mistake to identify Babylon with Rome, though many scholars do, as it is with Jerusalem. Babylon could equally well be seen in any of these classic manifestations from the past or in modern times. Nazi Germany, Idi Amin's Ugandan regime, Soviet Russia, Mao's China, British colonialism, or even aspects of American life. Interesting that they note aspects of American life. This volume is probably, I don't know, I want to say maybe 2004, something like that. Wonder what they'd say today. Mm-hmm. So the point is that rather than being a literal place, here it represents everything that is false. And in this case, this is going to be, the woman is going to represent the followers of the beast or a false religion. So then, who are these waters? Where do these waters come from? Look at the very next verse, in verse 2. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with her. I went one verse too many. Go back to the end of verse 1. I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. So what are the waters? Do you remember a couple of weeks ago we identified the sea? Do you recall that? Here, every version I found uses a different word. It does not use the same word that you'd find for sea, which is thalassa. And you'll recall that when we studied the sea, it literally meant a body of water as opposed to any kind of land. But depending on the context, it could be used as a description of something else. We're going to end up with the same thing here. It's a different word that's used. The waters that's used in Greek is hydor. Boy, don't we get a few words from that in our vocabulary today? Hydrology, hydronics, and almost anything dealing with water. It literally also means the waters, but it figuratively can mean something else. Fortunately, once again, we're given the definition of what that is. If we leaped forward to verse 15, we'd find this. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are people, multitudes, nations, and languages. So now we know who the woman is and who the waters are that represent these multitudes. So we're going to get the next view in just a minute. This is the woman who is sitting on the beast and is surrounded by the multitudes, by these waters. This is going to represent, at least from Rhodes's perspective, false religion. Now, although Babylon is only called the harlot here in verses 1, 5, 16, and later in chapter 19:2, her habitual fornication is introduced in 14:8 as her imminent and well-deserved judgment. Now, both the kings of the earth and the inhabitants of the earth are seduced into committing spiritual adultery with Babylon. And the indication is that she made them drunk with power, material possessions, and false worship. Again, that's why Rhodes is going to say this destruction of Babylon is the religious Babylon. Now, to set that up, we're going to have to expose a little bit about what we're going to talk about next, about who's the beast. But to do it, I want to go back to chapter 13, where we're first introduced to the beast from the sea. And let me read to you, just as a reminder, what that tells us. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 crowns on his horn, and on each had a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like that of a lion. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have had a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can make war against him? And then in verse 8 it says, all inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb that was slain. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast. Again, a false religion. Now, you'll notice I also said that, and we've got 3 beasts that we've dealt with here. You'll recall we've dealt with 3 different beasts as the unholy trinity. The first was the dragon, which was described for us as told, that is Satan. The second was the beast from the waters. That's going to be the Antichrist. And the final one is the beast out of the earth, and that's going to be the false prophet. This chapter is going to focus on the second of those, who is the Antichrist. Now, in verse 3, when it says in the Spirit, all of this has been John's spiritual journey, and he's in an exalted state where he gets the visions of actually the entire book. And the wilderness is a woman identified as Babylon, the mother of harlots, has been sitting is found sitting on a scarlet beast. I want to come back to that here in just a few minutes. We'll spend a little more time about her relationship to another woman we've already met in Revelation. So now we get to verse 3, and verse 3 is going to help us a little bit with the description. Then the angel carried me away to the Spirit in the desert. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had seven heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet. So who's the beast? Well, we just talked about it. The beast is clearly identified with the same beast, the beast out of the sea, or the Antichrist. Let me give you a kind of a visual representation of that. Let's look first at the woman and the beast. Does anybody think she looks like Elizabeth Taylor? No.
Definitely.
I'm not saying anything here, but Lynn?
Is that how many husbands she had then?
No, we need more beasts, I think.
She had at least 7, I think.
Yeah?
I don't know.
I don't know if it's my age or I just think it'd be more accurate to call her Jane Fonda.
There's a fantasy.
Okay,
Sorry.
Lynn?
all right, so in verse 3, then I saw a woman. You're saying woman is an evil city or Babylon.
Yes, that's...
Sitting on a scarlet beast is, the beast is what? False religion.
The beast is the false prophet. She represents false religions. I'm sorry, not the false prophet. The Antichrist is the beast.
Well,
Okay, so we have the evil city sitting on the Antichrist.
Yes.
Okay.
hold on, question, please.
Mm-hmm.
So, throughout the Bible, we see that, you say the woman is a religion. Jeremiah 6:2, I have likened the daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman, the church. 2 Corinthians 11:2 says, I am jealous over you with godly jealousy, for I have espoused you one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. So the New Testament teaches that the virgin woman is the bride of Christ. Mm-hmm. So this woman's obviously not a virgin woman, but it's a church, a religion. She wants to be worshipped, but not a virgin. She has
Correct.
filled herself with falsehoods.
Correct.
In Daniel, we learn that the beast are always kingdoms. The metal man says, "This is Medo Persian. This is Babylon."
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that? So we know that beast means a political power, a kingdom. So this church that wishes to be worshipped with falsehoods is riding on top of political powers,
Which we're going to come to here in just a minute. Do you have a question related to
Well, you
this?
said beast was something different just then, I thought, but
The Antichrist.
The beast
the
is
Antichrist, but the beast in the Bible means a political power.
Let's see if we get further into this. If it doesn't address your question, we'll come back to it in just a second. Does that work for you? So who is the beast? Well, we looked at the first depiction here of what was just described, right? Now, let's go back to one of our earlier sessions and look at when we were first introduced to the seven-headed beast of chapter 13. Do you see some similarities here? You better see a lot of them, because it's essentially the same piece of the puzzle. Lynn, do you have something?
No.
So it's essentially this, what we're being told now is that the woman representing the false religion is sitting on the beast. We're going to get a further description of the beast, and it is going to indicate that it is kingdoms or powers or authorities. We'll get that further as we get a little further into it. And then in verse 4, I want you to notice the woman, Babylon, is dressed like a queen, wearing purple, scarlet, gold, and pearls, though her appearance, though the appearance of the great harlot is regal, her royal golden cup is full of abominations and filthiness, speaking of idolatry and unclean acts against God. Now, I want you to look at verse 4 with me, because it's going to break into two pieces. And the first part of it is the description from the standpoint of the people who look at the outward appearance, and then we're going to get God's understanding of this. So go to verse 4. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She had a gold cup in her hand. There's a comma there. So far what we're getting is the view from the people who are worshiping the woman and the beast. Now, or the woman worshiping the beast. Now, start with me after the comma. Filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. That's going to be God's view of what this woman is. And then we're given the name. The name on Babylon's forehead may imply that Babylon is ultimately subordinate to the beast. Mystery may be the first part of this title for Babylon the Great. So if you look at verse 5, she had a golden, the title was written on her forehead, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abomination of the earth. So the name of Babylon's forehead may imply that Babylon is ultimately subordinate, as I said, to the beast. And the name on her forehead may also identify her in more ways than one. As an example, Roman prostitutes during the time of, well, even before the time of Christ, frequently wore a headband with their name engraved upon it, so you could identify them. Now, I want you to notice, I said earlier that we have two different women that we're talking about. The first woman back in chapter 12 representing Israel and God's people, and this woman representing idolatrous and false religion. These two women, thus related, are set out against the other, one against the other, as opposition and rivals, and must necessarily be interpreted this way. Now, I want you to think about this. If we have Christ and Antichrist, don't we have the woman of Christ and the woman of abomination? In other words, it's done specifically to draw the similarities and exceptions between Christ and his bride and Christ and the Antichrist and this woman. As Antichrist corresponds to Christ as a rival antagonist to Christ, so Great Britain corresponds to the woman that bears the man-child that we read about back in chapter 12. Now, you'll notice in verse 6, and we'll stop there because the verse 7 starts, we won't stop there, we'll go on to read the rest of it, but verse 6 ends this way. The woman Babylon is drunk with the blood of the saints and Christian martyrs, as well as by the wine of her fornication. Thus, her actions are doubly repugnant to the Lord, as acts of anyone who persecutes God's people. The woman's hatred of Christianity is clearly portrayed in this verse. Being drunk from saints' blood implies a time of extraordinary slaughter. Then we get to chapter 7. Not chapter 7, verse 7. And in verse 7, here's what happens. Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once now is not, and will come up in the abyss." So beginning in chapter 7, and I'll continue reading through the rest of it, this is going to be the angel, one of the angels, probably one of the angels of the 7 bowls, explaining to John what he's just seen. As I said earlier, unfortunately, the explanation can sometimes be as complicated as what's written in the prophecy, and you'll find that true here, I think. But the one of the bright spots, as I said, of apocalyptic literature is it almost always has, once the prophecy is read, it almost always has some kind of explanation. The explanation will be difficult here, but it will make some sense. The beast, starting in verse 8, the beast which you saw once was, now is not, and will come up out of the abyss, and will go to destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written on the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because he once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for a little while. The beast who once was, and now is not, is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them because he is the Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put into their hearts to accomplish this purpose by agreeing to give the beast their power to rule until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So, thanks for the explanation of what it was, right? Seems to get a little tougher. So let's wade into it. So what the Gospel of John saw, or what the Apostle John saw, still needs some explanation to him in its detail. Since the disclosure was granted to him not to perplex but to instruct him, the angel promises to clarify the mystery of the woman and the beast. Now, as I said, often prophecy, especially apocalyptic, will interpret itself, although sometimes the interpretation is also very difficult. In verse 8, one of the more difficult passages that you'll find here, the description of the beast is one who was and is not and will ascend and go to perdition, is a conscientious contrast to the depiction of God. Do you remember in the depiction of God in chapter 1? Who is and was and ever will be. This is a conscientious setting apart or setting against each other what the beast would be. Now, we read in Revelation 13, I'm going to read that again just so you get kind of the context for it. I'm going to read just a part of it about the beast and his mortal wound. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Men worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshiped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can make war against him? Now, as I said, it's a difficult concept. So what is it they're talking about? Once again, I'm going to rely on somebody smarter, much smarter. The expositor's commentary. Now, let me tell you what they say about this beast. The beast is the monster from the abyss, the satanic incarnation of idolatrous power described in chapter 13, verse 1 that we just got through reading just a minute ago, mentioned earlier in chapter 11, verse 7, and whose destruction is seen in chapter 19, verses 19 and 20. John is told that the beast once was, now is not, and will come out of the abyss. This seems clearly to be a paraphrase of the idea of chapter 13 that I just read, of the sword-wounded beast who is healed. The language is similar, the astonishment of the world's inhabitants identical, and the threefold emphasis on this particular feature is repeated in both contexts. That John's beast is not refers to his defeat by the Lamb on Calvary. To those who worship only the Father and the Son, all other gods are nothing or non-existence. Satan once had unchallenged power over the church and was, and now he is defeated. He's the defeated sovereign is not. Yet he's given a little time to pose God and his people. So the beast here with the wound once was, then was not, and will come again. Ron Rhodes has a slightly different take on it, but basically the same, that the reason these people are worshiping the beast is because of what they thought was a resurrection to life of the beast. Never happened before. They'd never seen it other than Jesus Christ. So now we've got the false religion believing this Antichrist has the ability of life over death. Now, in verse 10, 9 and 10, the mind which has wisdom can refer back to what we just read. Most likely refers to what we're going to read here in verse 9 and subsequently. So it could refer to all the following verses. So what do the 7 heads represent? Let's go back and look at verse I better get out of chapter 13 or I'll really confuse things. This calls for a mind with wisdom in verse 9. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. So, the 7 heads of the beast. So what do the 7 heads of the beast represent? Now, you'll notice it also says 7 mountains and 7 kings. Since the word mountain also means hills in Revelation, most interpreters, although they're 2 separate words, most interpreters understand this as referring to the 7 hills along the Tiber River, well-known designation as a well-known designation for the city of Rome. Let me show you what that kind of depict what that is. These are the 7 hills. The outlying red is the outskirts, or I guess the city limits of Rome. I suspect this was during John's time, and you'll notice there are 7 hills that the city of Rome is built on. So many will say that this is the 7 hills that's talked about. I did want to point out one other thing, because we've talked about it so much over the period of this class. Do you remember what we've talked about in terms of 7s? We just got to our last 7, the 7 kings. So we're getting dangerously close to wrapping up all that's going to happen in Revelation. And the last 2 chapters are the ones we want to look at. The last 3 chapters actually are the ones we want to look at. But we are now getting dangerously close to the end of the thing. Now, let's go back to our 7 mountain analogy here, or 7 mountain map. And should point out that 7 mountains may also refer to successive world empires, since mountains are typically symbols of earthly kingdoms or empires. Now, according to this view, 5 would be past kingdoms, and we'll look at those in just a minute. The 6th being the Roman Empire, and the 7th another which has yet to come. So, what are those? Well, there's a number of ways to look at this. This is the most traditional. See you guys, good luck, and see you guys next week.
We'll be gone next week, Tom.
Well, good, then you won't miss anything. So according to this view of the mountains, the 5 would be past kingdoms. And most would group them this way. Almost everyone I've read that follows this line would group them this way. That the past kingdoms were Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. And then we have a question mark on who the 7th is. But Revelation 17:11 tells us who the 8th is. And the 8th was the beast. So who is the 7th one? Well, there's a number of possibilities. As I said, according to this view, these would be the 7 kings, or the 7 kingdoms, or the 7 mountains. Now, perhaps it's to be a revived Roman Empire. Kings may refer to Roman emperors, but that's probably a little more unlikely, since more than 5 had reigned before the writing of Revelation. There were 11 in the 1st century, but it's still a possibility. Now, I'll tell you what Ron Rhodes says about this in just a minute. And verse 11 and 12 is what he's going to address. The beast is the 8th and is of the 7. The beast is related to the 7th king, but also a separate identity. So, who is the 7th beast? According to Rhodes, I'll tell you.
U.S.
Well, you probably wouldn't get any argument from me, but it's probably not very biblically sound. I don't think we'd pull it out.
We fit in there, that's for sure.
Well, we certainly do. I agree with that. So, as do a number of other entities throughout the world. First of all, when he says he must remain a little while in verse 10, he will be allowed to execute authority for 42 months. Now remember, Ray Rhodes is looking at this as though he's back in the period of tribulation. So he's looking at it from that perspective, which is going to be, according to Rhodes, is going to be the last half of tribulation. And then he goes on to say this: the beast is an eighth, but belongs to the seven. What does belong to the seven mean?
Lineage?
Comes out of it,
Could be, pardon?
just comes out of that country or?
Possibly. I'll read what Rhodes says, and then I'll come back and try to address that. The Antichrist is both the seventh and the eighth king. We've already established him as the beast that was but is not, as the beast out of the waters. So according to Rhodes, it's both. The Antichrist is both the seventh and the eighth king. He's the seventh king prior to the mortal wound, and he's the eighth king after the so-called resurrection. The eighth king goes to destruction. Now, and this, Eileen, I'll tell you, this comes from the book of Tom, because there's no good exegesis for this that I've been able to find. When it says is an eighth, but it belongs to the seven. What is the one common denominator for everything you see up here?
They're Antichrist.
Not yet. The common denominator is each of those world powers were, in the way they ruled, were horrific in the way they dealt with people. Let me give you an example. Assyria. When the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom in 722, and they lead people into captivity, do you know how they led people into captivity? That's right. They had a hook through their nose. Literally a fish hook looking assembly that was tied to the person behind them, with another hook through the nose to the person behind them, with another hook to the nose. What happens if one of those fall?
It hurts.
It hurts. So if the common denominator, and again, I'll tell you, this is from the book of Tom, when it says is of the seven, the common denominator of these is all the way they treated God's people. Well, treated people in general. When we get to Rome, it's going to be even worse. And when Daniel describes Rome, he's going to describe them as a terrible, in fact, we'll look at it here in a few minutes. So from the book of Tom, I'm going to exposit that the out of the seven means acted similar to what the previous seven were. The difference is all those were world leaders. These are going to be other world. The last two would be other world leaders. Does that make sense? So now let's talk about the 10 horns.
Tom?
Yeah.
But now if the Antichrist is called the seventh and the eighth, and becomes a sort of transfigures or forms into the eighth after the mortal wound, then that's where, at least from the world's perspective, he wouldn't become otherworldly until he becomes the eighth. As a seventh, he would be of this world. I mean, at that point, he to the world appears in that part of the deception that he is one of us, that he is human, and so he is resurrected. So he wouldn't necessarily appear otherworldly until he transformed into
Not human. He would be an otherworldly type of figure. I mean, how many figures do you see with 7 heads and
Right.
10 crowns?
Right.
So still be what I'd call an otherworldly figure.
Okay.
So what about the 10 horns? The 10 kings who ultimately rule under the authority of the beasts cooperate fully and give back their power and authority to the beasts. So look at verse 13 with me for just a second. Well, let's go back to verse 12. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will make war against the Lamb. That's their one purpose, by the way. They will make war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will overcome them, because the Lord is Lord of lords, King of kings, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. So, now, who are the rulers? Well, there's 3 possibilities here. One is, some understand these 10 rulers to be the provincial heads in the Roman Empire during John's day. which we would see in a preterist or a historist view. The second is that the 10 are to be taken symbolically to mean a host of national powers aligned with the beast. And the third is a 10-nation confederacy, perhaps a revived latter-day Roman Empire. So they can be viewed in any one of those three methods. Probably the latter two would fit more readily in our view, which would be symbolically mean a host of national powers, or a 10-nation confederacy, perhaps a revived latter-day Roman Empire. Now, when I say latter-day Roman Empire, you have to remember how big the Roman Empire was. So when we say it could be a revived Roman Empire, we're talking about everything from northern Africa to western Asia to much of Europe. So that Roman Empire could be any host of folks that it could be.
You're referring to the pagan Roman Empire, the armies,
Yes.
but now we also have the papal Roman Empire. So you have to ask yourself, who is the largest church in the world? What man has the most power at this time currently? United States, 300 million people. The Roman Catholic Church, 1.2 billion.
So, pardon?
I think 1.2.
Well, whatever it is, it's a bunch.
So it's still the world power.
Yep. Now, and that is, I'm sure, what David's going to cover, I would think.
No.
No, you aren't. Well, then you'll have to now, because I just laid it on you. So, now, this is, I want to give you a more concrete understanding of this. So go with me back to Daniel, if you got your Bibles. Go with me back to Daniel. And we're going to be in chapter 2. Although there's a couple of chapters that we could relate to this. We're going to relate chapter 2 to these powers. Now, let me just read it to you, and then we'll come back and look at our...
What chapter?
I'm sorry, chapter 2,
Thank you.
verses 39 to 45. So basically, Len, we're going to be on to you, the left-hand side of our chart here. You see where the chapters are listed for the book of Daniel in the upper green part? So we're going to be in chapter 2, and this is, do you remember when we talked about this before? This is Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and Nebuchadnezzar calls all his wise men in, and he says to them, okay, I want you to interpret a dream for me. But before you can interpret the dream, I want you to tell me what the dream was. And all of them said, well, nobody can do that. Daniel comes forward, he said, I can't do it either. But the God of the universe can. You give me one day to pray over this. I'll come back and I'll tell you the dream and I'll tell you what it means. That's what he's doing here. He's already told him the dream, and now he's going to interpret it. And here's what he's going to say in chapter 2, verses 39 to 45. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior to you. So, after you, who's he got to be talking about?
Medo-Persia.
He's got, well, at this point, after you, the you here is Babylon. That's Nebuchadnezzar. The one that's going to succeed is right, Medo-Persia. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In that time, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. Now, there's a couple of pieces that Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar in his dream that he just alluded to. One was, well, first of all, he's alluded to the kingdoms. He said Babylon. That was Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. He said the one to succeed is going to be Medo-Persia. The one to succeed them would be Greece. The final one would be Rome, and that's where Rome is where he leaves John as well, because nothing has happened up until then. Rome is still in power. But then he goes on to say, below that, you're going to find the toes, the toes of the feet. And he says that's something yet to come. And he describes what the toes of the feet are, and you'll notice he says there are 10 of them. And he says it's a mixture of iron, which we already know is Rome, and clay, which is much more brittle. That's why many people will say this will be a revived Roman kingdom at some point in the future. You'll notice on our timeline here, it's after the Antichrist, or at the Antichrist during the tribulation moment. And then it also talks, you see the kind of molten rock coming down? It talks about that Christ is the one who's going to destroy those kingdoms. So the concept of the 10 kings comes from Daniel, and according to Daniel, it will be some type of revived Roman kingdom infused with something else. Whatever that something else is, doesn't really make any difference, because ultimately, who's going to be the winner? You just figured that out, didn't we? The little rock is going to do the damage here. So the 10 league, in verse 17, the 10 kings in league with the beast will be so bold as to make war against the Lamb. He, the all-powerful Lord of lords and King of kings, will easily overcome them at his second coming. We're going to read about that in chapter 19, verses 19 to 21. Now, we've already talked about verse 15, which is the waters. But we get to what I think is a very complicated verse, and I'm going to give you two alternatives here. In verse 16 and 17, read those with me if you would. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. So now all of a sudden the beast is turning on the one that was riding on her back, riding on its back. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked, and they will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put into their hearts to accomplish this purpose by agreeing to give the beast their power to rule until God's words are fulfilled. So, what does all this mean? The 10 horns will grow to hate Babylon, the harlot. As a result, they will expose and then utterly destroy her. Well, I'd like to tell you that I know exactly what that means, but I don't. Because there's at least two interpretations of it. I'm going to give both of them to you. And one comes from Rhodes. Now remember, Rhodes' perspective is all of this goes back to the time of tribulation. And here's what Rhodes says. The 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. Here's what Rhodes says. The Antichrist will utilize the false religious system, the prostitute that we've talked about that came up, the prostitute, to initially bring unity to the people of the world. Once he has accomplished his purpose, he no longer needs the false religion. He will hate it and dispose of it with the help of his 10 lieutenants. By the middle of the tribulation period, the Antichrist now intends to be the sole object of worship. God has put into their hearts to carry out his purpose, from verse 17. Even though the Antichrist and his 10 lieutenants destroy the false religious system, God is actually bringing about his sovereign purpose through them. God will allow the Antichrist to come into the world, into world dominion, but only for a short time. So according to Rhodes, this is going to occur sometime at mid-tribulation. In the last 3.5 years of tribulation, it's the Antichrist only. Now, let me give you the other interpretation from the Expositor's Bible Commentary. And let me tell you what they say about this. By the way, most of what I've been able to find, most interpret, unless they are doing a preterist interpretation or a historist interpretation, most will fall into these two categories. The first is that Babylon, in chapter 17, is the fall of Babylon, religious Babylon. Chapter 18, the fall of commercial Babylon. Or they don't differentiate between the two, and they will fall in the category of this happens during mid-tribulation or at mid-tribulation, or it's at the end. And the Expositor's Bible seems to do it that way. The attack on the prostitute indicates that in the final judgment, the kingdom of Satan, by divine purpose, will be divided against itself. The reference to the prostitute being hated by her former lovers, stripped naked and burned with fire, are reminiscent of Old Testament prophets' descriptions of the divine judgment falling on the harlot cities of Jerusalem, Tyre, etc., etc., etc. The description of the punishment of convicted prostitutes who are priest daughters in Leviticus 21, and the burning with fire is explained by Ford as the pouring of molten lead on their throats, is combined with the picture of judgment against rebellious cities. So the ravaging of the whore by the monster and his horns is John's most vivid symbol of the self-destroying evil power. So what the Expositor's Bible commentary says is, at the end, even the people who follow the false religion and the Antichrist are going to turn against each other and battle against each other. Now, that only leaves the last verse, which is 18. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. We already talked about that when we determined who it was in the past. You know, I'm tempted to say questions, but I don't really think I want any.
Yeah.
So, are there?
How does this church control these kings?
Is this church? Well, I think I know what you're going to say, but I think it's through the Antichrist.
So, but you go back to Daniel 9, it says, as I observed the 10 horns, up from amongst them a little horn came up, and he had eyes of a man, and he had great power. This is in Daniel 7,